The stagecoach rattled like a skeleton coming apart at the joints. Eliza pressed her handkerchief against her nose, trying to filter out the dust that invaded every breath, every pore. Across from her sat a mining engineer with tobacco-stained teeth and a widow traveling to Cheyenne whose eyes hadn't stopped leaking since they left Omaha. The fourth passenger, a whiskey drummer, had fallen asleep with his mouth open, snoring like a rusty saw. She'd been on this coach for 6 days. 6 days of eating trail dust, sleeping in way stations that smelled like mouse droppings and desperation, and pretending she wasn't terrified of what waited at the end of the line. A husband, a stranger, Samuel Pritchard. She'd seen one photograph, a stern man with a severe part in his hair standing beside a newly built house. His letters were efficient, grammatically correct, and about as warm as a banker's handshake. But he owned land. He had prospects. He represented security in a world that had offered her precious little of it after her father's business collapsed. "How much longer?" the widow asked, her voice thin. The driver's shout came from above. 2 hours to the relay station. Maybe 3 if this heat doesn't kill the horses first." Eliza looked out the window at the landscape that seemed to stretch into forever. Rolling grassland punctuated by the occasional cottonwood. The sky so huge it made her feel like an insect. This country swallowed people. She'd heard the stories. Cholera, snakebite, simple bad luck. Out here, civilization was just a thin veneer over something far older and far less forgiving. The mining engineer pulled out a flask. "Water's getting low." "We'll make it," the driver called down, though he didn't sound convinced. That's when the first shot cracked across the prairie silence. The widow screamed. The whiskey drummer jerked awake, his hand fumbling for a pistol that wasn't there. Eliza's heart slammed against her ribs as the stagecoach lurched forward, the driver shouting, whipping the horses into a panicked gallop. "Bandits!" someone yelled, maybe the shotgun guard, maybe the driver. It was impossible to tell over the thunder of hooves and the screaming of wood under stress. Eliza grabbed the leather strap, her knuckles white. Through the window she caught glimpses of riders, 4, maybe 5, coming fast from a shallow draw she hadn't even noticed. Their faces were covered with bandanas. Sunlight glinted off rifle barrels. Another shot. The coach swerved violently. Eliza's head cracked against the doorframe, stars exploding across her vision. The widow was praying in rapid, breathless German. The mining engineer had his arms braced against both sides of the coach, his face gray. "They're gaining!" the shotgun guard shouted. A third shot, and this time Eliza heard it punch through wood somewhere above her head. The driver cursed, long and creative. The horses screamed, a sound she'd never forget, high and almost human. Then the world tilted. The coach hit something, a rock, a hole. Maybe just the violence of the turn, and the left side lifted. For one suspended moment, Eliza felt weightless. The widow's mouth was open in a scream that seemed silent. The drummer's flask floated in midair, whiskey spilling out in a perfect amber arc. Then gravity remembered them. The crash was an explosion of sound, breaking wood, shattering glass, metal screaming, human voices lost in the chaos. Eliza felt herself thrown like a rag doll, her body slamming into something hard, then something harder. Pain erupted in her left leg, bright and total, and she heard herself scream. The world stopped moving, but it kept spinning inside her head. Dust. Dust everywhere, choking, blinding. She tried to breathe and couldn't, tried to move and discovered that pain had a physical weight that could pin you down. Her leg. Something was very wrong with her leg. Voices. Rough voices, speaking English with accents she couldn't place. Boots on wood. The click of a rifle being cocked. "Anyone armed?" "Driver's dead." The guard took off running. "Let him. Check the passengers." Eliza tried to focus through the haze of pain and dust. The coach had overturned, landing on its side. She was trapped under something, the seat maybe, or another passenger. Every breath sent fresh knives through her chest. Broken ribs. Had to be. Hands grabbed her, rough and impersonal, dragging her out into the screaming brightness of the afternoon sun. She cried out, the pain in her leg turning her vision white at the edges. "This one's hurt bad," someone said. She was dropped onto the ground. Prairie grass scratched against her cheek. She could see boots, scuffed leather, one pair with silver spurs that jingled when the man walked. Could hear the other passengers being pulled from the wreckage. The widow sobbing. The mining engineer trying to reason with them, his voice high with poorly concealed panic. "We don't have much," he was saying. "Just take what you want and go. There's no need for anyone else to get hurt. Shut up." The voice was flat, bored. "Line up, all of you." "She can't stand," another voice said, younger, maybe even hesitant. "Her legs broke." A pause. Eliza forced her eyes open, trying to see through tears and dust. The bandits were shadows against the sun, faces hidden behind cloth. One of them crouched down beside her. She could smell tobacco and sweat and horses. "That right? You busted up?" She tried to speak, but her voice came out as a croak, managed a nod. The man studied her for a long moment, then stood up. "Leave her. She ain't going nowhere." "We can't just," the younger voice started. "I said leave her. You want to carry a cripple across 20 miles of prairie in this heat? We got what we came for. Let's move." Tara gave her a voice. "Wait, please." But they were already moving away. She could hear the other passengers being forced to walk, their protests cut short by sharp commands. The widow's crying grew fainter, the mining engineer's voice, still trying to negotiate, fading into the distance. "Please," Eliza tried again, but the word dissolved into a cough that brought up blood-tinged dust. She lay there, trying to process what was happening. They were leaving. They were actually leaving her here. Hurt, alone, miles from anywhere. "Wait," she whispered to no one. "Come back." But the prairie swallowed her words like it swallowed everything else. For a long time, minutes or hours, she couldn't tell. She just lay there, trying to breathe through the pain. The sun hammered down, turning the overturned coach into a monument to her stupidity. What had she been thinking, coming out here? Trading one kind of desperation for another? The leg hurt worse than anything she'd experienced. When she finally worked up the courage to look at it, she wished she hadn't. The left leg bent at an angle that made her stomach heave. Compound fracture, some distant, clinical part of her mind supplied. The bone hasn't broken through the skin, but it's close. She tried to drag herself toward the coach's shade, but the movement sent such a bolt of agony through her body that she vomited into the grass, retching until there was nothing left. Then the practical thoughts came, each one colder than the last. No water except what might be in the wreckage, if the canteens hadn't burst in the crash. No food except what she'd been carrying in her carpet bag, also somewhere in the wreckage. No shelter except the overturned coach, which would be an oven by midday tomorrow. No help coming. The relay station was hours away. Even if someone found the coach, even if someone came looking, how long would that take? A day? 2 days? She wouldn't last that long. Not in this heat, not with this injury. The sun crawled across the sky, indifferent to her suffering. She drifted in and out of consciousness, dreams mixing with delirium. Sometimes she was back in Philadelphia, in her father's house before the creditors came. Sometimes she was on the coach, and the crash was about to happen, and she kept trying to warn everyone, but no words would come out. When she opened her eyes again, the light had changed. Late afternoon, maybe early evening. The shadows were longer. The heat had lost some of its brutal edge, replaced by something almost gentle. She laughed, a dry sound like paper crumpling. Gentle, as if the prairie gave a damn about being gentle. That's when she heard it. Hoofbeats. For a moment, hope flared so bright it hurt worse than the leg. Someone was coming. Someone had found her. She tried to call out, but her throat was too dry, her voice too weak. The rider appeared over a low rise, a single silhouette against the reddening sky. Not the bandits. Wrong direction, wrong pace. This rider was moving with purpose, but not urgency, tracking something. She managed a sound somewhere between a cry and a croak. The rider's head turned, hesitated, then changed course, heading straight for her. As he got closer, details emerged. Tall man on a bay horse that had seen hard miles. Wide-brimmed hat shadowing a face she couldn't quite see. Rifle in a saddle scabbard. Bedroll and supplies suggesting someone who lived out here, not just passed through. He reined in about 10 feet away, studying the scene. The overturned coach. The scattered luggage. The drag marks where the other passengers had been forced to march. And her, lying in the grass like something the wolves hadn't gotten around to eating yet. He dismounted in one smooth motion, ground-tying the horse. When he crouched beside her, she finally got a good look at his face. Hard. That was the first word that came to mind. Not cruel, but carved by experiences that didn't leave room for softness. Maybe 40 years old, maybe older, The frontier aged people in ways that had nothing to do with calendars. Weathered skin, pale eyes that could have been blue or gray in the fading light, a mouth set in a line that suggested he didn't smile much. "You hurt?" he asked. His voice matched his face, rough from disuse, flat as the prairie itself. The stupidity of the question almost made her laugh again. "My leg," she managed. "Broken." He looked at it, his expression not changing. "How long ago?" "Hours, maybe. I don't know. They took the others. Left me." "Bandits?" She nodded. "How many?" "5. Maybe 4. I couldn't tell." He studied the ground, reading signs she couldn't see. 5. Headed northwest. 3, 4 hours ago. He looked back at her. "Any other injuries?" "Ribs, maybe. Hard to breathe." He nodded once, as if confirming something he already suspected, then stood up and walked to his horse, retrieving a canteen. When he returned, he lifted her head with a gentleness that surprised her, pressing the canteen to her lips. "Slow," he said. "You drink too fast, you'll puke it back up." The water was warm and tasted like metal and heaven. She wanted to gulp it, drain the whole thing, but he controlled the flow, making her take small sips. When he finally pulled it away, she wanted to cry at the loss. "Got a name?" he asked. "Eliza? Eliza Rowan. Caleb Rourke." He said it like he was reporting the weather. "I'm going to check that leg. It's going to hurt." "It already hurts." "It's going to hurt worse." He was right. When his hands probed the injury, even through her skirts, the pain was so intense that darkness crowded her vision. She heard herself make sounds she didn't know she was capable of making. "Compound fracture," he said when he finished, confirming her earlier diagnosis. "Needs to be set, and soon. Longer we wait, harder it gets." "Set it?" The words didn't make sense through the haze of pain. "Put the bone back in place. Splint it. You've got maybe a day before the swelling gets too bad." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something that might have been sympathy in those pale eyes. "I'm not going to lie to you. It's going to be the worst pain you've ever felt. And if you don't, you'll lose the leg, probably die of infection before anyone gets you to a doctor." The choice, such as it was, wasn't really a choice at all. "Do it," she said. He nodded, stood up. "I need to get supplies for my camp. It's about a mile from here. I'll be back in 30 minutes. "You're coming back?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, revealing the fear she'd been trying to hold at bay. He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm coming back." Then he mounted his horse and rode away, disappearing over the same rise he'd appeared from. And Eliza lay there in the growing darkness, trusting a stranger because she had no other choice. The sun set. Stars came out, more than she'd ever seen in her life, scattered across the sky like someone had spilled diamonds. The temperature dropped fast. Another thing about the prairie she hadn't expected. The heat that had been trying to kill her all day vanished, replaced by a chill that sank into her bones. She was shivering by the time she heard hoofbeats again. Caleb returned, leading a pack mule loaded with gear. He worked quickly, efficiently, setting up a small camp within sight of the wrecked coach. Built a fire. Laid out tools that looked surgical and terrifying. When he came back to her, he was carrying a leather strap. "Bite down on this," he said. "What are you going to do?" "Set the leg. I told you." "I know what you said. I mean, how?" He settled back on his heels. "I was an army medic, long time ago. Did field surgery for 2 years before I got smart enough to stop catching bullets meant for other people." He gestured to the leg. "This ain't my first broken bone. Won't be my last." "Will it work?" "Probably. Maybe. Won't know until I try." He held out the leather strap again. "This is going to happen one of 2 ways. Either you bite down and try not to scream too loud, or I knock you out. Your choice." "You can knock me out?" "I can, but you might not wake up. Head injuries are tricky." She stared at the leather strap, took it, put it between her teeth. "Smart woman," Caleb said. Then without ceremony or countdown, he grabbed her leg and pulled. The pain was white, pure white. It had texture and weight and taste, filling every cell in her body, erasing everything else. She heard screaming from very far away and realized it was her, muffled by the leather strap she was biting hard enough to tear. Voices. His voice, low and steady. Hold still. Almost there. Hold still. Another pull. Another adjustment. The grating sensation of bone sliding against bone. Wrong and terrible and necessary. Then it was done. She lay there gasping, tears streaming down her face, the leather strap falling from her mouth. Caleb was already working, his hands quick and sure, binding the leg between two straight branches he'd cut, wrapping it tight with strips of cloth. Done, he said finally. Sat back, wiped his hands on his pants. You did good. Better than most men I've seen. She couldn't speak, could barely breathe. The pain had receded from white-hot to merely agonizing. He lifted her, surprisingly gentle for a man his size, and carried her to the fire, laid her on a bedroll he'd spread out, covered her with a blanket that smelled like horses and wood smoke. Sleep if you can, he said. I'll keep watch. The bandits are long gone, and even if they weren't, they'd smell this fire and know someone armed is here. They prey on the weak, not on trouble. He added another piece of wood to the fire. Sleep. She wanted to argue, wanted to ask 100 questions, wanted to know why he'd come back, why he was helping her, what he expected in return. But exhaustion crashed over her like a wave, and she sank into darkness before she could form the words. When she woke, the fire had burned down to embers and the sky was shifting from black to deep blue. Dawn was coming. Caleb sat on the other side of the fire, exactly where he'd been when she fell asleep, his rifle across his knees. How's the leg? He asked without looking at her. She tested it carefully, expecting agony, found pain instead, steady, present, but bearable. It hurts. Good. Means you can still feel it. He poured something from a pot into a tin cup, brought it to her. Drink this. Coffee. Real coffee. Strong and bitter. It tasted like civilization. What happens now? She asked. He settled back down, staring into the remains of the fire. That depends. Where were you headed? Bannock. To meet my fiancée. Something flickered across his face. Not quite judgment, not quite amusement. Arranged marriage? Is it that obvious? You don't have the look of a woman going to meet someone she loves. He sipped his own coffee. Bannock's 3 days' ride north. With that leg, you can't ride, can't walk, can barely sit up. So I'm stranded. You're injured. There's a difference. He was quiet for a moment. There's a doctor in Sweetwater. That's a day's ride west. Small settlement, nothing fancy, but the doc's competent. He can look at that leg proper, make sure I said it right. And then? And then you send a telegram to your fiancé. Tell him what happened. He can come get you or send someone. Caleb looked at her directly. Or you can rethink the whole thing. What do you mean? I mean a man who lets his bride-to-be travel unescorted across hostile territory is either broke, stupid, or doesn't value her much. Maybe all three. He stood up, dumping the rest of his coffee into the fire where it hissed and steamed. But that's your business. Heat rose in her face. Anger or embarrassment, she couldn't tell. You don't know anything about my situation. I know you were on that stagecoach. I know you're hurt. I know you're alone. He started breaking camp with the same efficiency he'd shown setting it up. Everything else is speculation. She watched him work, this stranger who'd saved her life and now seemed determined to irritate her back to health. Why did you come back? He paused, a bedroll half-tied in his hands. What? Last night. You said you'd be back, and you were. But why? You could have just kept riding. The question seemed to genuinely puzzle him. You were hurt. People get hurt out here all the time, and I don't usually find them. He finished with the bedroll, tied it to the pack mule. But I found you. That means something. Means what? He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd woken. Means you're my responsibility now. Whether either of us likes it or not. And somehow, impossibly, in that moment, Eliza Rowan felt safer than she had since leaving Philadelphia. The ride to Sweetwater took most of the day. Caleb rigged a travois behind his pack mule, 2 long poles with a blanket stretched between them, creating a makeshift litter. Every bump and jolt sent fresh pain through her leg, but it was better than dying alone in the grass. They didn't talk much. Caleb wasn't the talking type, and Eliza was too busy managing pain to make conversation, but she watched him. The way he scanned the horizon constantly, the way his hand never strayed far from his rifle, the way he seemed to read the land like a book written in a language she didn't understand. Once, he stopped abruptly, his body going still in a way that made her heart race. "What?" she whispered. "What is it?" "Riders. Maybe 2 miles south." She couldn't see anything except grass and sky. "How do you know?" "Dust. Wrong color for buffalo, wrong pattern for wild horses." He studied it for another moment, then clicked to the animals and kept moving. "Probably nothing to do with us." "But maybe?" "Maybe," he agreed, "which is why we keep moving." They reached Sweetwater as the sun was setting, a collection of rough buildings that barely qualified as a town. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, a few houses, and a small structure with a hand-painted sign reading Dr. J. Harrison, physician. Caleb carried her inside. She'd stopped being embarrassed about that somewhere around midday, and deposited her on an examination table that had seen better decades. Dr. Harrison turned out to be a woman, 50-something, gray-haired, with the calm competence of someone who'd seen everything twice. She examined Eliza's leg while Caleb waited outside, running her hands over the splint, asking questions about pain and sensation. "Well," she said finally, "whoever set this knew what they were doing. It's a good alignment. Clean break. No bone fragments I can feel. You were lucky." "Lucky," Eliza repeated. "You could be dead. You could have lost the leg. You could be stuck with a charlatan who'd have done more harm than good." Dr. Harrison began rewrapping the splint with fresh bandages. "Instead, you're here, the bone's set properly, and if you follow instructions, you'll walk again. That's luck in my book." "How long?" 6 weeks minimum before you can put weight on it. 8 weeks to be safe. Longer if you're stupid about it." She fixed Eliza with a stern look. "You planning to be stupid about it?" "No, ma'am." "Good, because I don't have time to fix you twice." She called out toward the door. "Mr. Rourke, you can come back in." Caleb entered, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable in the confined space. "Your work?" Dr. Harrison asked, gesturing to the leg. He nodded. "Where'd you learn field medicine?" "Army, during the war." "Shows." She washed her hands in a basin, drying them on a towel that had once been white. "She needs rest, proper food, clean water. That leg needs to stay immobile. She moves around too much, the bone could shift." "I'll make sure she rests," Caleb said. The doctor's eyebrow rose. "Will you now? And where exactly is she going to do this resting?" For the first time since she'd met him, Caleb looked uncertain. "I hadn't thought that far ahead." "Typical man." Dr. Harrison turned to Eliza. "You got money for a hotel." Eliza's carpet bag had been salvaged from the wreck, but when she checked, her money, what little she'd had, was gone. The bandits had been thorough. "No," she admitted. "Friends? Family? Anyone in this territory?" "Just my fiancé, in Bannock." "Send him a telegram?" "I don't think he'd come," Eliza heard herself say, and realized it was true. Samuel Pritchard would send condolences, perhaps a small amount of money to cover expenses, but he wouldn't ride 3 days to collect a bride who'd become inconvenient. Dr. Harrison and Caleb exchanged a look. "I could stay here," Eliza offered. "Work for my room and board once I'm healed. I can cook, clean, sew." "In 6 to 8 weeks," the doctor interrupted. "What about until then?" Silence fell over the small room. Then Caleb spoke, his voice resigned. "She can stay at my camp." Both women looked at him. "Your camp," Dr. Harrison said slowly, "is not a hospital. It's shelter. It's food. It's better than leaving her here with no money and no prospects." He looked at Eliza. "Assuming that's acceptable to you." Every rule of propriety she'd ever been taught screamed that it wasn't acceptable. A woman, alone, living with a man she barely knew. It was scandalous, ruinous, the kind of thing that would destroy her reputation beyond repair. But her reputation was already destroyed, wasn't it? She'd been abandoned on the frontier, robbed, broken. Samuel Pritchard wouldn't want her now, even if she made it to Bannock. The life she'd planned was as shattered as her leg. And the alternative was what? Charity she couldn't repay? Destitution in a town that owed her nothing? "It's acceptable," she said. Dr. Harrison shook her head but didn't argue. Then you both better listen carefully. She spent the next 20 minutes giving instructions. How to keep the wound clean, signs of infection to watch for, exercises Eliza should do to prevent the muscles from atrophying, a list of supplies they'd need. When she finished, Caleb paid her from a small leather pouch, more than the visit probably cost, Eliza suspected, and carried Eliza back outside. The stars were out again. The same stars that had witnessed her abandonment now watched as a stranger loaded her onto his mule like cargo and prepared to carry her to an uncertain future. You don't have to do this, she said as he adjusted the travois. He paused, not looking at her. I know. Then why? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because someone did it for me once, when I needed it. Seemed only fair to pass it along. He didn't elaborate, and she didn't push. Some stories, she was learning, weren't told with words. They rode out of Sweetwater under a moon bright enough to cast shadows, heading into the vast darkness of the prairie. And Eliza Rowan, who'd come west seeking safety, found herself in the care of a man who offered nothing but survival. Somehow in that moment, it felt like enough. Caleb's camp wasn't much to look at. A canvas tent pitched in a shallow depression where cottonwoods clustered near a creek, a fire ring made of blackened stones, and supplies stored in weatherproof boxes strapped to a crude wooden frame. But it was dry, relatively sheltered from the wind, and more permanent than Eliza had expected. How long have you been here? She asked as he eased her off the travois, trying not to jar her leg. 3 weeks, maybe 4. He carried her to the tent, ducking inside to lay her on a bedroll that smelled like sage and tobacco. I scout for wagon trains sometimes. Between jobs, I camp here. Creek's got good water, and the hunting's decent. She looked around the tent's interior. Spare, organized. A man's space with no softness to it. A rifle stood propped in the corner. Saddlebags hung from a support pole. A few books stacked on a flat rock. Surprised her, those books. She'd assumed he couldn't read. He caught her looking. What? Nothing, I just didn't expect books. Why? Because I live in a tent? There was an edge to his voice, not quite anger. I can read just fine. Probably better than most. I didn't mean everyone means it. He stepped back out of the tent. There's water in the canteen by your head. I need to tend the animals. Don't try to move around. He was gone before she could apologize. The first few days passed in a haze of pain and awkward adjustment. Caleb had clearly not planned on having a patient to care for. He moved around camp like a man disturbed from a routine, his silence taking on a quality that felt almost resentful. He brought her food, rabbit stew, cornbread, coffee, but set it down without comment. Changed her bandages with the same clinical efficiency Dr. Harrison had shown. Helped her with necessities she'd rather not think about, his face carefully blank, as if ignoring her mortification would make it disappear. You don't have to stay, she said on the third morning, unable to bear the tension anymore. I know this isn't what you signed up for. He was crouched by the fire, frying bacon in a pan that had seen years of use. Where would you go? I don't know, but you didn't ask for this. A stranger living in your camp, needing help with everything. You think I don't know that? He flipped the bacon with more force than necessary. You think I'm doing this because it's convenient? Then why are you doing it? He opened his mouth, closed it, went back to the bacon. Eat your breakfast. But something shifted after that conversation. Not warmth exactly. Caleb didn't seem capable of warmth, but a gradual thawing. He started talking more, though his words came out like he was rationing them. Told her about the creek, how it ran year-round unlike most in the area. Pointed out animal tracks in the mud and explained what made them. Mentioned, almost casually, that she could borrow his books if she wanted. She chose one at random, a collection of Walt Whitman's poems, the pages dog-eared and stained. Found a passage he'd underlined. I am large, I contain multitudes. You like poetry? She asked that evening as he checked her splint. He shrugged. Sometimes. When it's not trying too hard to sound pretty. Whitman doesn't try too hard? Whitman tells the truth, even when it's ugly. He rewrapped the bandage, his hands surprisingly gentle. Most poetry is just lying with better words. She thought about that. What about novels? Do you read those? When I can get them. Libraries aren't exactly common out here. He tied off the bandage. Why? I used to read them all the time. In Philadelphia. Before... She trailed off. Before what? Before everything fell apart. She hadn't meant to say it, but the words escaped anyway. My father owned a printing business. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. Then he made some bad investments, borrowed money from the wrong people. When he died, the debts fell to me. Caleb settled back on his heels. That's why the arranged marriage. Samuel Pritchard's money would have cleared the debts, given me a fresh start. She laughed, but it came out bitter. Stupid, right? Trading one kind of cage for another? Not stupid, practical. He stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. Doesn't mean you have to like it. Did you ever do something practical that you hated? He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening prairie. Yeah. I did 4 years of something practical that I hated. They called it serving my country. I called it legal murder. The rawness in his voice stopped her cold. She'd known he'd been in the war. He'd mentioned being an army medic, but she'd assumed he'd been proud of it. Men usually were. You regret it? She asked carefully. I regret what it turned me into. He fed another stick to the fire, watching sparks spiral up into the night. You go to war thinking you're fighting for something bigger than yourself. You come back knowing you were just another fool with a gun, killing other fools with guns. And the people who sent you, they didn't care which fools survived. Is that why you're out here? Alone? I'm out here because I don't fit anywhere else. He looked at her then, and in the firelight, his face seemed older, more weathered. Cities make me nervous. Too many people, too much noise. Out here, at least the dangers are honest. A rattlesnake doesn't pretend to be your friend before it bites you. She understood that more than she wanted to admit. The days developed a rhythm. Mornings, Caleb would check her leg, bring her breakfast, then disappear for hours. Hunting, he said, or checking his trap lines. He left her water, food, and one of his books. She'd read, dozed, practiced the leg exercises Dr. Harrison had prescribed. The pain was becoming familiar, almost like an old companion. Still present, but not quite as sharp. Afternoons, when the heat became oppressive, he'd rig a shade cloth outside the tent so she could sit in the fresh air without the sun beating down on her. They'd talk, or rather, she'd talk and he'd listen, occasionally offering a comment that showed he'd been paying more attention than she thought. She told him about Philadelphia, the bookshop she'd loved on Market Street, the way her mother used to make tea with too much honey, her father's stubborn optimism even as his business collapsed around him. Caleb listened to all of it without judgment, without the platitudes people usually offered. When she finished, he'd simply nod and go back to whatever he was working on, sharpening his knife, mending a saddle, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. Don't you have any stories? She asked one afternoon, frustrated by his reticence. Not ones worth telling. Everyone has stories. Not everyone wants to tell them. He didn't look up from the rifle. Some things are better left alone. That's a lonely way to live. Maybe. He snapped the rifle back together with practiced ease. But it's my way. She wanted to push, to crack open whatever wall he'd built around himself. But she was learning that Caleb couldn't be pushed. He moved at his own pace, revealed himself in fragments so small you had to pay attention to notice them. Like the way he always made sure her coffee was hot before bringing it to her. Or how he'd positioned the tent so the morning sun wouldn't hit her face. Or the night she woke up crying from a nightmare about the crash. And he was there immediately, not touching her but present, his voice low and steady. You're safe. You're here. Breathe. 2 weeks into her stay, a storm rolled in, one of those prairie thunderstorms that turned the sky black and the air electric. Caleb moved quickly, securing the tent, bringing the animals closer to camp, checking that everything was tied down. This gonna be bad? Eliza asked, watching the clouds build. Bad enough. He drove another stake into the ground. You ever been through a plain storm? Not like this. Then hold on. The storm hit like a fist, wind that screamed and tore at the tent fabric. Rain so heavy it was like standing under a waterfall. Thunder that felt like it was cracking the sky open. Lightning that turned night into day, again and again, strobing the world into something alien and terrifying. Caleb stayed in the tent with her, one hand braced against the support pole, the other ready to grab her if they needed to move. Water leaked through the canvas in places, forming puddles on the ground. The wind tried to rip the whole structure away. Is it always like this? She shouted over the noise. Sometimes worse. He shifted position, checking the tent stakes from inside. We'll be fine. Tents held through bigger. A particularly violent gust nearly proved him wrong. The tent bowed inward, fabric snapping like a sail. Eliza felt Caleb's arm come around her shoulders. Not romantic, purely protective, pulling her closer to the center where it was safest. They stayed like that for an hour, maybe more, while the storm raged. Eventually, Eliza stopped being terrified and started being fascinated. The raw power of it. The way nature out here didn't apologize for being dangerous. It's beautiful, she said, watching lightning fork across the sky. Caleb looked at her like she'd lost her mind. It's trying to kill us. I know, but it's still beautiful. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. You're stranger than I thought, Eliza Rowan. Is that a compliment? Might be. The storm passed as quickly as it came, leaving behind a world washed clean. The air smelled like wet earth and ozone. Stars appeared in the breaks between clouds, impossibly bright. Thank you, Eliza said into the quiet. For what? For not leaving me behind when it would have been easier. He was silent for a moment. You keep thanking me. You don't need to. Yes, I do. You saved my life. You're still saving it. I'm just keeping you alive until that leg heals. He moved to check the fire, which had been reduced to wet ash. Don't make it more than it is. But it was more. They both knew it. The third week brought a visitor, a grizzled man on a mule, leading a string of pack animals. He rode into camp without announcement, as if he had every right to be there. Rourke, he called out. Heard you were camped out here. Caleb emerged from the tent, and Eliza saw his whole body go tense. Not afraid, exactly. Wary. Morrison. That any way to greet an old friend? The man dismounted, revealing a face that had seen 60 hard years and survived them all through meanness. His eyes found Eliza. Well now, who's this? None of your business. Caleb positioned himself between Morrison and the tent. What do you want? Can a man just stop by for a friendly visit? You've never made a friendly visit in your life. Morrison laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. Fair point. Truth is, I'm heading up north. Thought you might want to come along. There's a wagon train forming in Fort Collins. Needs scouts. Pays good. I'm busy. I can see that. Morrison's gaze slid to Eliza again, and she didn't like what she saw there. Calculation. Assessment. Nursing ain't usually your line of work. She was hurt. I helped. That's all there is to it. If you say so. Morrison pulled out a flask, offered it. Caleb shook his head. Morrison shrugged and drank. Offer stands for another week. After that, they'll hire someone else. Your choice. He rode out the way he came, leaving tension in his wake. Who was that? Eliza asked when Caleb came back to the tent. Someone I used to work with. He started rebuilding the fire with sharp, angry movements. Nothing to worry about. He seemed to think you should take the job. Morrison thinks a lot of things, most of them wrong. But the pay is good. Money's not everything. It is when you don't have any. She watched him work. I'm keeping you from earning a living, aren't I? You're not keeping me from anything. Caleb, drop it, Eliza. He struck the flint harder than necessary, finally getting a spark. I said I'd see you through this, and I will. Morrison's job can wait. But she could see it eating at him over the next few days, a restlessness that hadn't been there before. He'd stand at the edge of camp, staring north like he could see all the way to Fort Collins. His silences grew longer, more brooding. You should go, she said finally, unable to bear it anymore. He was cleaning the breakfast dishes in the creek, stopped, his hands going still in the water. What? The job. You should take it. I'm healing well enough. I can manage for a few days alone. No. I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you to go. You're wasting time here, and we both know it. She pushed herself up straighter, ignoring the protest from her leg. I'll be fine. He turned to face her, water dripping from his hands. You can't even walk. I can crawl if I have to. The point is, I'm not your responsibility anymore. You've done more than enough. You don't get to decide when you stop being my responsibility. Actually, I do. She held his gaze. I'm grateful for everything you've done, truly. But I won't be the reason you give up opportunities. I've already wrecked my own life. I won't wreck yours, too. For a long moment, he just stared at her, his face unreadable. Then he went back to the dishes, scrubbing them with enough force to wear through the metal. You haven't wrecked anything, he said finally, his voice low. You're just here, that's all. And you hate it. I don't hate it. The words came out rough, like they hurt. That's the problem. She didn't know what to say to that, didn't know what it meant or if she wanted to know. He finished the dishes in silence, then disappeared into the prairie for the rest of the day. When he came back at sunset, he was carrying 2 rabbits and a decision. I'm not taking Morrison's job, he said, dropping the rabbits by the fire. But we need to talk about what happens next. What do you mean? I mean, you've been here 3 weeks. Your leg's healing, but you've got at least 3 more weeks before you can walk. Maybe longer before you can ride. He crouched by the fire, not looking at her. You need to decide what you want to do. What are my options? You can send word to your fiancé. See if he'll still have you. If not, there are towns where you could find work once you're healed. Dr. Harrison mentioned you can sew. There's always need for seamstresses. Those are my only options? Marry a man who won't want me or spend my life making dresses? You could go back east. To what? My father's debts? She shook her head. There's nothing for me there. Then what do you want? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them were ready to examine. I don't know, she admitted. For the first time in my life, I genuinely don't know. He nodded slowly, like he understood that better than she realized. Then you've got 3 weeks to figure it out. But the universe, as it turned out, had other plans. The 4th week brought 2 things. Increased mobility for Eliza, who could now hobble short distances with a crutch Caleb had fashioned from a forked branch, and trouble in the form of 3 men on horseback. They rode into camp at midday when Caleb was checking his traps and Eliza was alone. She heard them coming, hoofbeats and rough laughter, and felt her stomach drop. One of them dismounted, a thin man with a scar running down his cheek. Well, well, what do we have here? This is private property, Eliza said, trying to keep her voice steady. You need to leave. Private property? He laughed. Lady, this is open range. Ain't nothing private about it. His eyes traveled over her, lingering on the splinted leg. You're that woman from the stagecoach, the one we left behind. Recognition hit her like cold water. These were the bandits. Or some of them. She couldn't be sure. They'd all worn bandanas during the robbery, but the scarred man's voice was familiar. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. He moved closer. The other 2 stayed on their horses, watching. We figured you'd be dead by now. Guess you're tougher than you look. Or luckier, one of the mounted men added. Where's your friend? Scarface asked. The one who's been playing nurse? Gone. Hunting. She edged backward, using the crutch for balance. Won't be back for hours. Then we got time. He gestured to his companions. Search the camp, see what's worth taking. There's nothing here. Let us be the judge of that. They tore through Caleb's belongings with casual violence, dumped out his food stores, kicked over his water barrels, rifled through his saddlebags. She watched helplessly, rage building in her chest. After everything Caleb had done, everything he'd sacrificed to help her, these men were destroying it. Stop it, she said, her voice rising. Just take what you want and leave. Scarface turned to her, something mean in his eyes. What we want? Now that's an interesting question. He started toward her. The gunshot cracked across the prairie, kicking up dirt 6 inches from Scarface's boot. Everyone froze. Caleb stood at the edge of camp, his rifle aimed and steady. He must have run back. She could see sweat on his face, his chest heaving, but his hands were rock solid. Next one goes through your knee, he said calmly. The one after that through your friend's chest. The third wherever I feel like putting it. He worked the lever action, chambering another round. Your move. For a long moment, nobody breathed. Then one of the mounted men spoke. We were just leaving anyway. Smart. Caleb's rifle didn't waver. And if I see you near this camp again, I won't waste bullets on warning shots. They mounted up, Scarface shooting Eliza one last look that promised this wasn't over. Then they rode off, heading west. Caleb didn't lower the rifle until they were out of sight. When he finally did, she saw his hands were shaking. You okay? He asked, crossing to her in 3 long strides. I'm fine, they didn't touch me. She looked at the destroyed camp and said, I'm sorry, I tried to stop them. You did exactly right. You didn't get hurt, and that's all that matters. He checked her over anyway, his eyes scanning for injuries. How did they find us? They recognized me from the stagecoach. The full reality of it hit her. They know we're here now. Yeah. He set the rifle down, started cleaning up the mess. They do. What are we going to do? He was quiet for a long time, gathering spilled cornmeal, righting overturned boxes. Finally, we're going to move camp tonight, somewhere they won't think to look. But my leg, I'll manage. We don't have a choice. He met her eyes. They came here once, they'll come back, and next time I might not hear them in time. They spent the rest of the day packing. Caleb moved with grim efficiency, sorting supplies into essential and expendable. When darkness fell, he loaded everything worth saving onto the pack mule and helped Eliza onto his horse. Where are we going? She asked as he led them away from the creek, away from the only shelter she'd known in weeks. There's a box canyon about 10 miles north. Good water, only one way in, easier to defend. He walked beside the horse, one hand on the reins. It's rougher than here, but it's safe. They traveled through the night, moving slow to spare her leg. The moon was bright enough to cast shadows, turning the prairie into something dreamlike and strange. Eliza dozed in the saddle, jerking awake each time the horse stumbled, her leg throbbing with each step. Dawn found them at the mouth of the canyon, a narrow cleft in a low ridge, opening into a small valley protected on 3 sides by rock walls. A spring fed a pool that overflowed into a thin stream. Grass grew thick here, and she could see why he'd chosen it. How did you know about this place? She asked as he helped her down. I didn't. I've been scouting it for the past week, just in case. He started unloading. Always good to have a backup plan. They set up a new camp in silence, both too exhausted for conversation. By the time the sun was fully up, Caleb had the tent pitched and a fire going. He made coffee, strong and bitter, and they drank it sitting on opposite sides of the fire like 2 survivors of a shipwreck. I'm sorry, Eliza said finally. This is my fault. If you hadn't helped me, don't. He cut her off. Don't apologize for being hurt. Don't apologize for needing help. And sure as hell don't apologize for other people being criminals. But, I made a choice, Eliza. I knew the risks. I knew taking you in might bring complications. He poured himself more coffee. I did it anyway. Why? He looked at her across the fire, and for the first time she saw something in his face beyond wariness and survival. Something almost like tenderness. Because some things are worth the risk, he said quietly. And in that moment, in a box canyon with nothing but rocks and sky, and a man who'd upended his life to save hers, Eliza Rowan felt something shift inside her chest. She'd come west looking for safety, for security, for a life that made sense on paper. But maybe, just maybe, she'd found something better. Something that scared her more than any bandit ever could. The box canyon became their world. Days blurred together in a rhythm dictated by healing and necessity rather than clocks or calendars. Eliza's leg grew stronger. She could put weight on it now without wanting to scream, could walk short distances without the crutch. The splint came off in the 5th week, replaced by careful wrapping that Caleb changed twice daily with hands that had learned to be gentle. You're doing better than I expected, he said one morning, watching her hobble to the spring and back without assistance. What did you expect? More complaining. Most people I've patched up spent half their time telling me how much it hurt, and the other half telling me I was doing it wrong. She settled back against a sun-warmed rock, catching her breath. Would complaining make it hurt less? No. Then what's the point? He almost smiled. She was getting better at reading his face, learning to spot the subtle shifts that meant amusement or approval. You're tougher than you look, Eliza Rowan. I wasn't. Before all this. She stretched the healing leg carefully, feeling the pull of new tissue knitting itself together. Before the crash, I would have complained. I would have cried and demanded someone fix it for me. You cried plenty after I set that bone. That was different. That was pain. This is just... She searched for the word. Inconvenience. You've got a strange definition of inconvenience. Maybe I've got a strange definition of a lot of things now. He went quiet at that. his eyes on the horizon where heat waves turned the distant prairie into something liquid and uncertain. They did that sometimes, said things that brushed up against the truth of what was happening between them, then retreated into safer territory before either had to acknowledge it directly. Because something was happening, had been happening since that night he'd said some things were worth the risk, maybe even before that. It showed in small ways. The way he'd started sitting closer to her in the evenings, close enough that their shoulders sometimes touched. The way she'd caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression unguarded in a way it never was when he knew she could see. The way conversations that used to be practical, about supplies and weather and her healing progress, had started drifting into territory that felt dangerously personal. "Tell me about the war," she said one evening as they sat by the fire, the canyon walls turning gold in the sunset. He stiffened. "Why?" "Because you never talk about it, and I think it's important." "Important to who?" "To understanding you." He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you're willing to tell me." He picked up a stick, broke it into smaller pieces, feeding them one by one to the fire. "I enlisted in '61. Thought I was going to save the Union, preserve freedom, all that noble garbage they tell you when they want you to carry a gun." Another stick to the flames. "Got assigned to a field hospital after they found out I could read and had steady hands. Spent 4 years putting men back together just so they could go get shot again." "That must have been hard." "Hard doesn't cover it." He stared into the fire. "You ever try to save someone who's begging you to let them die? Ever hold a man's hand while he bleeds out because there's nothing you can do except make sure he's not alone at the end?" She didn't answer, didn't need to. "I did that for 4 years. And you know what the worst part was? After a while I got good at it. Got so I could look at a wound and know in 5 seconds if the man had a chance or not. Could do amputations without flinching. Could walk through a field hospital full of screaming, dying men and feel nothing except tired. You learned to survive it. I learned to stop being human." He threw the rest of the stick into the fire. "When the war ended, I tried going back to regular life. Got a job in a hospital in St. Louis. Lasted 3 months. Couldn't stand it. The smallness of it, the routine, the way people complained about things that didn't matter. So I came out here. To be alone. To be away from people who expected me to be someone I wasn't anymore." He looked at her directly. "You're the first person in 6 years I've had a real conversation with. The first person who didn't make me want to leave the second they opened their mouth." Her heart did something complicated in her chest. "Why me?" "I don't know. Maybe because you didn't ask anything of me except help. Maybe because you didn't pretend to understand things you didn't. Maybe because—" He stopped, started again. "Because you're out here trying to figure out who you are, same as me. And that's honest. I can work with honest." The air between them felt charged, heavy with words neither of them was brave enough to say. Eliza wanted to reach across the space separating them, wanted to touch his hand or his face, or something that would make this feeling real instead of just possibility. But she didn't, because once she did, there would be no going back. And she wasn't sure either of them was ready for that. "Thank you," she said instead, "for telling me." He nodded once, then stood up and walked to the edge of camp where the darkness swallowed him whole. The 6th week brought a visitor, though not the kind they'd feared. Dr. Harrison rode into the canyon on a sturdy gray mare, her saddlebags packed with medical supplies, and her expression mixing exasperation with relief. "Took me 3 days to track you down," she announced, dismounting with the stiffness of someone unused to long rides. "When you didn't show up for the follow-up appointment, I got worried." "We had to move," Caleb said, already putting coffee on to boil. The doctor's presence didn't seem to surprise him, though Eliza couldn't figure out how she'd found them. "So I heard. Morrison mentioned you'd had trouble with bandits." Dr. Harrison turned to Eliza. "Let me see that leg." The examination was thorough and mostly silent. The doctor's hands moved over the healing bone with professional detachment, pressing and prodding while asking questions about pain levels and range of motion. "It's healing well," she announced finally. "Better than I expected, honestly. Another 2 weeks and you should be able to ride. 3 weeks and you'll be close to normal, though you'll probably have a limp when it rains." "Small price to pay for keeping it," Eliza said. "Indeed." Dr. Harrison accepted the coffee Caleb handed her, settling onto a rock with a sigh. "Now, let's talk about what happens next." What do you mean? Eliza asked, though she had a sinking feeling she knew exactly what the doctor meant. I mean you're healing. Soon you won't need constant supervision or help with daily tasks, which raises the question of where you go from here. She sipped her coffee, studying them both over the rim of the cup. Have you contacted your fiancé? No. Planning to? Eliza glanced at Caleb, who was very carefully not looking at her. I don't know. Well, you need to decide, because whatever arrangement you two have going here, she gestured between them, it's temporary by necessity. You can't live in a box canyon forever. Why not? Caleb asked quietly. Dr. Harrison's eyebrows rose. Because winter's coming in 3 months. Because you're both young enough to have lives ahead of you that don't involve hiding from bandits in the middle of nowhere. Because... She stopped, her expression softening slightly. Because you both deserve better than survival. Maybe survival's enough, Caleb said. It's not, and you know it. The doctor set down her coffee. Look, I'm not here to judge. What you do with your lives is your business. But Eliza needs to make a legal decision about her situation. Either marry the man waiting for her or formally break the engagement. She can't just disappear. Why not? Eliza heard herself ask. People disappear out here all the time. And most of them end up dead, destitute, or desperate. Is that what you want? No. But she didn't want to marry Samuel Pritchard either. Didn't want to go back to being the woman she'd been 6 weeks ago. Small, scared, trading herself for security she didn't even really believe in. There's a third option, Dr. Harrison said, as if reading her mind. Sweetwater needs a school teacher. The last one married a rancher and moved to Wyoming. It doesn't pay much, but it's honest work with room and board included. Teaching. Eliza had never considered it, but the idea took root immediately, unfurling like something that had been waiting for permission to grow. I'm not qualified, she said automatically. You can read and write. You're not drunk or violent. Out here, that's qualified enough. The doctor pulled a folded paper from her pocket. I took the liberty of writing to the town council on your behalf. They're willing to meet with you. When? Whenever you can ride the distance, which, according to my examination, should be in about 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 14 days until she had to make a decision that would determine the shape of her entire future. She looked at Caleb again. This time he was looking back, his face carefully neutral, but his eyes holding something she couldn't quite read. Think about it, Dr. Harrison said, standing up. I'll be back through in a month. You can give me your answer then. She left the way she'd come, riding out of the canyon with the same determined efficiency she did everything. Her absence left a silence that felt too large to fill with words. You should do it, Caleb said finally, still staring at where the doctor had disappeared. Do what? Take the teaching job. Just like that? You don't even want to discuss it? What's to discuss? He started cleaning up the coffee things with sharp, angry movements. It's a good opportunity, honest work, like she said. A chance to build a life. I have a life here. You have a temporary camp and a healing leg. That's not the same thing. Why are you doing this? Doing what? Pushing me away. She struggled to her feet, her voice rising. The doctor's right. I need to make decisions, but those decisions include you, whether you want them to or not. He wheeled on her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw real anger on his face. No, they don't. They can't. Don't you understand that? Understand what? I live in a tent, Eliza. I scout for wagon trains when I can find work, and hunt for food when I can't. I've got no property, no prospects, no future beyond the next season. What exactly do you think I have to offer you? Maybe I don't need you to offer me anything. Everyone needs something, and I can't be what you need. How do you know what I need? Because I know what you deserve. His voice dropped, losing its edge but gaining something raw. You deserve a home, stability, a life where you don't have to wonder if bandits are going to show up or if the food will last through winter. I can't give you that. What if I don't want that? Then you're not thinking straight. She crossed the distance between them in 3 limping steps, getting right in his face. Don't you dare tell me I'm not thinking straight. Don't you dare decide what's good for me without asking what I actually want. Fine. What do you want? The question hung in the air like smoke, and Eliza realized she was standing at a precipice, about to either step back to safety or jump into something that terrified her more than any broken bone. I want to stop running toward things I think I'm supposed to want, she said quietly. I want to stop making decisions based on what's practical or sensible or expected. I want... She stopped, took a breath, made the jump. I want you. The words landed between them like a confession or a grenade. She couldn't tell which. Caleb went very still. Eliza, I know it's crazy. I know it doesn't make sense. 6 weeks ago, I didn't know you existed, and now I can't imagine... Her voice caught. I was on my way to marry a stranger because it was safe, because it was the smart thing to do, and maybe that would have been fine. Maybe I would have been content with fine, but then the coach crashed, and you showed up, and everything changed. Nothing's changed, you're still... Everything's changed. I'm not the woman who got on that stagecoach. She would never have survived this. She would never have wanted to survive this. Eliza felt tears threatening, but pushed through them. You said some things are worth the risk. Well, this is worth the risk to me. You are. He looked at her for a long moment, something breaking behind his eyes. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. You think you do, but you're hurt and scared and grateful, and you're confusing that with, don't. She cut him off. Don't tell me what I'm feeling. Don't reduce this to gratitude or confusion or desperation. I'm not a child and I'm not an idiot. I know what I feel. And what's that? She wanted to say love, but the word felt too big, too presumptuous. They'd known each other for 6 weeks. You couldn't fall in love in 6 weeks, could you? That was fairy tale nonsense, romance novel garbage. Except it didn't feel like nonsense. It felt like the most real thing she'd ever experienced. I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, she said instead. For the first time in my entire life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Caleb's hands came up, framing her face with a gentleness that made her chest ache. You deserve better than me. Stop telling me what I deserve. I'm making a choice. This choice. You. Even if it means no house, no security, no guarantee of anything except hard living and uncertainty? Especially if it means that, because at least it's honest. She put her hands over his, holding them against her face. At least it's real. For one suspended moment, she thought he was going to pull away, thought he was going to retreat back into that careful distance he maintained like armor. Then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle or romantic or any of the things she'd imagined a first kiss should be. It was desperate and clumsy and tasted like coffee and desperation. His hands tangled in her hair, her fingers gripped his shirt. They kissed like people who'd been drowning and finally found air. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. This is a mistake, he said quietly. Probably. I'm going to disappoint you. Everyone disappoints everyone eventually. I don't know how to do this, the relationship thing. I'm not good at it. Neither am I. We can figure it out together. He pulled back enough to look at her properly. You're really sure about this? Are you asking if I'm going to change my mind in the morning? No. Are you asking if I'm terrified? Yes. Are you asking if I still want this despite being terrified? Also, yes. Something that might have been hope flickered across his face. I can't promise you easy. I don't want easy. I want real. Real I can do. He kissed her again, softer this time. When he pulled back, his eyes were still worried. What about the teaching job? What about it? You should still take it. She blinked. I just told you I want to be with you, and you're still trying to send me away? I'm trying to make sure you have options, that you're not dependent on me for survival. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. If we're doing this, if we're really doing this, then it needs to be a choice you keep making, not a trap you fall into because you have nowhere else to go. So you want me to take a job in Sweetwater? I want you to have your own life that you're choosing to share with me, not a half-life lived in my shadow. He sat down on the rock, pulling her carefully down beside him. If this is real, it'll survive you having work and independence. If it's not, better to know now. She hated that he was right, hated that even in this moment, especially in this moment, he was thinking practically while she wanted to just surrender to feeling. Where does that leave us? She asked. I don't know. We figure it out. He took her hand, studying it like it held answers. Maybe I take jobs closer to Sweetwater instead of ranging all over. Maybe I build something more permanent than a tent. Maybe... He stopped. Maybe we see if this is real or just two broken people holding on to each other in a storm. And if it's real, then we figure out what comes next. It wasn't a promise of forever, wasn't a declaration of love or a commitment to marriage. It was careful and conditional and deeply, frustratingly practical. It was also the most honest thing anyone had ever offered her. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I'll meet with the town council about the teaching job. I'll build my own life, and we'll see if this," she gestured between them, "is real or just survival instinct with better marketing." He almost smiled. "And if it's real, then we figure out what comes next," she echoed. They sat there as the sun set, hands linked, watching the canyon walls turn from gold to shadow. It wasn't the ending to her journey that Eliza had imagined when she boarded that stagecoach 6 weeks ago. It was messier, more uncertain, with no guarantees and no clear path forward. But it was hers, chosen freely, built from the broken pieces of who she'd been into something she was still discovering. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange state of suspended anticipation. They were together now, whatever that meant, but also separate in ways that mattered. Caleb started making trips to Sweetwater, selling pelts and picking up news. Eliza practiced walking longer distances, rebuilding strength and endurance. They talked about practical things, where she'd live, how often they'd see each other, what it would mean if she actually got the teaching position. But at night, by the fire, they also talked about things that weren't practical at all. About the books they'd read and the lives they'd imagined. About what scared them and what gave them hope. About whether people could really change or just became better at hiding who they'd always been. "I think people are capable of changing," Eliza said one evening. "Not fundamentally, you're still you, I'm still me, but in how we respond to things, what we choose." That's optimistic. Is it? Or is it just realistic about human complexity? He considered that. Maybe both. "What about you? Do you think you've changed?" "I think I'm less angry than I was," he said slowly. "For a long time after the war, I was angry at everything. The army, the country, the men who'd died, the men who'd lived, myself most of all." He poked at the fire. "But somewhere in the last 6 weeks, that anger got quieter." "Because of me? Because of you? Because of this?" He gestured at the canyon around them. "Because for the first time in years, I had something to protect instead of just survive." The words settled into her chest, warm and solid. On the 14th day, they packed up camp and rode for Sweetwater. Eliza's leg held up better than she'd feared, though by the time they reached town, her muscles were screaming. Dr. Harrison was waiting with a clean room above her clinic and news that the town council would meet with Eliza the next morning. "Nervous?" Caleb asked that night. He was staying in the stable loft. Propriety still mattered, even on the frontier, but had come to check on her before settling in for the night. "Terrified," she admitted. "What if they hate me? What if I'm terrible at teaching? What if you're exactly what they need, and this works out?" He leaned against the doorframe. "That's possible, too." "When did you become an optimist?" "I'm not. I'm a realist who happens to be looking at a woman who survived a stagecoach crash, a compound fracture, and 6 weeks living with me. If you can do all that, you can handle a room full of children." She laughed despite her nerves. "That's setting the bar pretty low." "Maybe. But you've been clearing low bars and turning them into something better your whole time out here. Why stop now?" He left before she could respond, but his words stayed with her through the sleepless night. The interview with the town council took place in the general store. 3 men and 2 women sitting on pickle barrels, asking her about her education and her experience with children and whether she understood that frontier teaching meant everything from basic arithmetic to breaking up fights. "I learn fast," Eliza told them, "and I don't quit easily." One of the women, Mrs. Hendricks, who owned the boarding house, studied her with sharp eyes. "Dr. Harrison says you've had a rough time of it." "Yes, ma'am." "That bother you? People knowing your business?" "Depends on what they do with the knowledge." Mrs. Hendricks smiled. "Fair answer. The job's yours if you want it. $30 a month plus room and board. School runs September through May. You start in 2 weeks. It was happening. She had a job, a future, something that was hers. That evening, she found Caleb at the edge of town, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of amber and rose. "I got it," she said. "I know. Dr. Harrison told me." He glanced at her. "Congratulations." "Thank you." She stood beside him, looking out at the same view. What happens now? You start teaching in 2 weeks. I take a scouting job that'll keep me close. There's a small outfit running supplies between here and Fort Collins. Need someone who knows the territory. How long will you be gone? 3 days out, 3 days back. Maybe 4 if weather's bad. He turned to face her fully. Is that going to work for you? Was it? Could she handle him leaving regularly, not knowing exactly when he'd return? Could she build a life that included uncertainty as a basic feature? I don't know, she said honestly. But I want to try. That's all we can do, try. He took her hand. And if it doesn't work, if this is too hard or too complicated or just not what either of us thought, we can change course. You do that? Change your plans? I'd try. Can't promise I'd be good at it, but I'd try. It still wasn't forever. Still wasn't a guarantee. But it was more than she'd had 6 weeks ago, when her future had been a stranger's photograph and a promise of security she didn't really believe in. When do you leave? She asked. 2 days? Need to meet the outfit, go over the route? 2 days. 48 hours to memorize the shape of his face, the sound of his voice, the feeling of his hand in hers. Then we'd better not waste them, she said. They didn't. Those 2 days became a crash course in being together, not survival partners or patient and caretaker, but 2 people choosing each other despite all the reasonable objections. They walked through Sweetwater holding hands, scandalizing the more conservative residents and earning knowing looks from Dr. Harrison. They had dinner at the boarding house where Eliza would be living, suffering through Mrs. Hendricks's pointed questions about intentions and propriety. They spent an evening at the stable where Caleb was staying, sitting in the hayloft and talking until the stars came out. I'm going to miss this, Eliza said, lying back in the hay. Just talking to you. We'll still talk when I get back. It won't be the same. No, it'll be different. Doesn't mean it'll be worse. She rolled onto her side to look at him. Are you scared? Of what? This. Us. The fact that we're trying to build something real when neither of us knows how. He was quiet for a moment. Yeah. I'm scared. Good. I'd worry if you weren't. That doesn't make any sense. Sure it does. If you weren't scared, it would mean you didn't care enough for it to matter. She reached out, tracing the line of his jaw. Fear means it's important. He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. When did you get so wise? Somewhere between the broken leg and falling for a man who lives in a tent. I don't live in a tent anymore. I'm upgrading to a stable loft. She laughed, and he pulled her closer, and they lay there in the hay watching dust motes dance in the fading light. It was imperfect and uncomfortable and absolutely nothing like the life she'd imagined. It was perfect. The morning Caleb left, Eliza stood outside the general store and watched him ride away with the supply outfit. He didn't look back. She hadn't expected him to, but his shoulders were set in a way she'd learned meant he was thinking too hard about something. Dr. Harrison appeared beside her. You going to be all right? I don't know, Eliza admitted. Ask me again in 6 days when he comes back. And if he doesn't? Then I'll still have a teaching job and a place to live and a life I'm building. She turned to the doctor. It'll hurt like hell, but I'll survive. Yes, Dr. Harrison said with satisfaction. You will. The first 3 days without Caleb felt like learning to breathe with only one lung. Eliza threw herself into preparing for the school term, organizing the small one-room building that would serve as her classroom, sorting through donated books with pages falling out and slates covered in years of scratches. Mrs. Hendricks stopped by twice a day with advice Eliza hadn't asked for and food she actually needed, since cooking for herself was proving harder than she'd anticipated. You're moping, the boarding house owner announced on the third afternoon, finding Eliza staring out the schoolhouse window instead of working. I'm not moping. You've been staring at that same stack of primers for 20 minutes. That's moping. Mrs. Hendricks settled onto one of the student benches with a grunt. He'll come back or he won't. Staring at the horizon won't change it. I know that. Do you? Because you've got that look women get when they're waiting for men to decide their fate. She fixed Eliza with a stern eye. You've got a job, a roof, and a future here regardless of whether Caleb Rourke rides back into town. Remember that. Eliza wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat because Mrs. Hendricks was right. She'd been so focused on whether Caleb would return that she'd forgotten she had a life here with or without him. That was the whole point of taking the teaching job: independence, choice, not trading one kind of dependence for another. "You're right," she admitted. "Of course I'm right. I've been married 3 times and buried 2 husbands. I know a thing or two about not letting your life revolve around a man." Mrs. Hendricks stood up, brushing dust from her skirt. "Now stop moping and come have dinner. I made stew, and you look like you haven't eaten properly in days." The stew was good, thick with vegetables and venison. Eliza ate 2 bowls and listened to Mrs. Hendricks talk about the children she'd be teaching, 12 of them, ranging from 6 to 14, with varying degrees of interest in education and discipline. "The Morrison boy is going to be your biggest challenge," Mrs. Hendricks warned. 13 years old and thinks he knows everything. His father's that scout who tried to recruit Caleb a few weeks back. Eliza's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "Morrison has a son here?" "2 sons. The younger one's sweet as pie, but Jacob—" She shook her head. "That boy's got his father's mean streak. You'll need to establish authority early, or he'll make your life hell." Perfect. As if she didn't have enough to worry about. The 4th day brought rain, a steady soaking downpour that turned Sweetwater's main street into a river of mud. Eliza spent it inside the boarding house, helping Mrs. Hendricks with laundry and trying not to count the hours until Caleb was supposed to return. The supply run was supposed to take 6 days. This was day 4. 2 more days of not knowing if he'd actually come back, if the job had gone well, if he'd decided this whole thing was too complicated and kept writing. "Stop it," she told herself, wringing out a sheet with more violence than necessary. "Stop catastrophizing." But her mind wouldn't cooperate. It kept conjuring scenarios: Caleb injured, Caleb deciding he preferred life on the trail, Caleb running into someone from his past who reminded him why he'd chosen solitude in the first place. Each scenario felt more plausible than the last. By the 5th day, Eliza had convinced herself he wasn't coming back. She woke up with that certainty sitting heavy in her chest, a weight that made it hard to breathe. It made sense, didn't it? They barely knew each other. 6 weeks of forced proximity didn't equal a foundation for anything real. He'd helped her because he was a good man, and she'd mistaken gratitude and proximity for something deeper. He'd realized that and made the smart choice. She got dressed, braided her hair with shaking fingers, and went downstairs for breakfast with her best attempt at composure. Dr. Harrison was there, drinking coffee with Mrs. Hendricks and looking concerned. "Heard anything?" the doctor asked without preamble. "About what?" "The supply run. They're a day late. Morrison sent word this morning. They should have been back yesterday." The weight in Eliza's chest transformed into something sharper, colder. "What does that mean?" "Probably nothing. Weather could have slowed them down, or they picked up extra work." Dr. Harrison's tone was reassuring, but her eyes betrayed worry. "But Morrison's taking a few men out to check the route, just to be safe." Just to be safe. Because out here, being a day late could mean bandits or injury or any number of disasters. "I'm going with them," Eliza said. Both women stared at her. "Absolutely not," Mrs. Hendricks said firmly. "My leg's healed enough to ride. You can stay here and let the men handle it," Dr. Harrison interrupted. "Morrison knows the route, and he's got armed riders. You going along won't help anything." "But I can't just sit here." "Yes, you can, and you will." The doctor's voice softened slightly. "I know it's hard, but sometimes waiting is the only option." Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to saddle a horse and ride out herself, but she knew they were right. Her leg was better, but not strong enough for hard riding. She'd slow them down at best, get herself hurt at worst. So she waited. The hours crawled by with the speed of geological time. She tried to work on lesson plans but couldn't focus. Tried to read, but the words blurred together. Finally gave up and sat on the boarding house porch, watching the road that led north toward Fort Collins. Afternoon faded to evening, evening to dusk. Still no sign of Morrison's search party or the missing supply run. "Come inside," Mrs. Hendricks said gently as full dark fell. "Staring won't make them appear faster." "I know, Eliza's voice cracked. "I can't lose him. Not now. Not when I just found—" "Don't borrow trouble. He's probably fine, just delayed." But even Mrs. Hendricks sounded uncertain. Eliza went inside but didn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and making bargains with a universe that didn't bargain. If he comes back safe, I'll never complain about anything again. If he comes back safe, I'll be patient with the difficult students. If he comes back safe, I'll... The sound of horses jolted her upright. She scrambled to the window, pressing her face against the glass. Too dark to see clearly, but she could make out shapes moving on the main street, voices calling out, the jingle of tack and the heavy breathing of tired horses. She was down the stairs and out the door before her brain caught up with her body. The search party had returned, and with them, thank everything, the supply wagons. Men were dismounting, talking in overlapping bursts about what had happened. Eliza pushed through them, searching for one specific face. She found him near the second wagon, talking to Morrison. He looked exhausted, muddy, and whole. Relief hit her so hard she nearly fell over. Caleb. He turned, and something shifted in his expression when he saw her. He said something to Morrison, then crossed to her in 3 long strides. "You're all right," she said stupidly. "Mostly." He gestured to his left arm, which she now saw was wrapped in a makeshift bandage. "Had some trouble with the cargo. Nothing serious." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind with too many crates and not enough common sense." He tried for a smile, but it came out crooked. "Wagon lost a wheel yesterday morning. Took us all day to fix it. Then we had to redistribute the weight. I got careless, took a crate corner to the arm. Bruised, not broken." She wanted to check the injury herself, wanted to drag him to Dr. Harrison immediately, but he was looking at her with an intensity that made everything else fade. "I was worried," she admitted. "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't apologize for things that aren't your fault." She reached for his good hand without thinking. "I'm just glad you're back." Morrison's voice cut through the moment. "Rourke, need you to sign off on the delivery manifest." Caleb squeezed her hand once. "Give me 10 minutes to finish this paperwork, then we can talk properly." She nodded, stepping back to let him work. But she didn't go far, couldn't bring herself to lose sight of him again. Dr. Harrison appeared at her elbow. "He's all right?" "He says so. Injured his arm. I'll check it after he's done with Morrison." The doctor studied Eliza's face. "You look like you've been through a war." "Feels like it." "Love usually does." Eliza turned to her sharply. "I didn't say..." "You didn't have to. It's written all over your face." Dr. Harrison's expression was knowing, but not unkind. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know." "Well, figure it out. Because that man's just as tangled up in you as you are in him, and neither of you seems to know how to handle it." Was it that obvious? Could everyone in town see what was happening between them, this fragile thing they were trying to build? The thought should have embarrassed her. Instead, it felt oddly freeing. If everyone already knew, there was no point in pretending. Morrison finally released Caleb from logistics duty. Dr. Harrison immediately commandeered him, dragging him to her clinic to examine the arm properly. Eliza followed, ignoring the doctor's pointed look. The injury was, as Caleb had said, mostly bruising, spectacular purple and black discoloration from shoulder to elbow, painful but not serious. Dr. Harrison cleaned it, applied salve, and rewrapped it with professional efficiency. "Keep it immobilized for 3 days," she ordered. "No heavy lifting, no wagon loading, no heroics." "Yes, ma'am." "I mean it, Rourke. You tear something in there because you're too stubborn to rest, you'll be useless for a month." "I'll make sure he rests," Eliza heard herself say. Both of them looked at her. "Will you now?" Dr. Harrison's eyebrow rose. "Someone has to. He's terrible at taking care of himself." Caleb opened his mouth, probably to argue, then seemed to think better of it. "She's not wrong." "No, she's not." The doctor finished tying off the bandage. "All right, you're free to go, but I want to see you in 2 days to check the bruising." They left the clinic together, walking into a night that had grown cool and clear. Stars stretched overhead in impossible profusion. The street was mostly empty now, the supply outfit having dispersed to beds and bottles. "Where are you staying?" Eliza asked. "Stable loft again, I guess. Unless they rented it to someone else while I was gone." "Stay at the boarding house. Mrs. Hendricks has a room." "Eliza, you need rest, a real bed, and someone to make sure you actually follow doctor's orders." She stopped walking, turned to face him. "Please, let me help you for once." He studied her face in the moonlight. This isn't about the arm, is it? No. You were really worried. Terrified. I should have sent word somehow. Should have. You couldn't have known the wagon would break. You couldn't have prevented the delay. She reached for his good hand again. I just need to know this is real, that you meant what you said about trying. I did. I do. He laced his fingers through hers. But I also told you this wouldn't be easy. 6-day trips where things go wrong and I can't send word. That's going to happen again. Probably a lot. I know. And you're still willing to, yes. She cut him off before doubt could creep in. I'm still willing to try, even though it's hard, even though it scares me. He pulled her closer, mindful of his injured arm until their foreheads touched. What did I do to deserve you? You didn't do anything. You just showed up when I needed someone and decided to stay. Not sure that's enough. It's everything. They stood there in the middle of Sweetwater's main street, holding each other while the night deepened around them. Eventually, Mrs. Hendrick's voice cut through the moment. You two planning to stand there all night, or are you coming inside? They broke apart, embarrassed but not quite willing to pretend nothing had happened. Mrs. Hendrick stood on the boarding house porch, arms crossed but eyes amused. I've got a room for Mr. Rourke, she announced. Proper room with a door and everything. Assuming you're both willing to behave with some semblance of decorum under my roof. Yes, ma'am, they said in unison. Good. Then get inside before you catch cold. The room was small but clean, with a real bed and a wash basin and a window that looked out on the street. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, moving carefully to avoid jarring his arm. I should let you rest, Eliza said from the doorway. You should, but I don't want you to. What do you want? Honestly, I want you to stay. Just sit with me for a while. He patted the space beside him. I spent 6 days thinking about what I'd say when I got back, and now that you're here, I can't remember any of it. She crossed the room, settling beside him. You don't have to say anything. Yeah, I do. He took her hand, studying it like he was memorizing every line. I spent the whole ride back trying to figure out how to do this right, how to be what you need without losing myself in the process, how to balance work and you and this life we're trying to build. Did you figure it out? No, but I realized something else. He looked at her directly. I realized I don't want to do any of it without you. The work, the traveling, the settling down eventually, none of it means anything if you're not part of it. Her heart stuttered. Caleb, let me finish, please. He took a breath. I'm not good at this. At feelings and words and making promises, I'm not sure I can keep. But I know what I feel when I'm with you. I know what it felt like thinking I might not make it back to tell you. And I know... His voice caught. I know I love you. Even though it's only been 6 weeks and that's crazy, and I probably shouldn't say it this soon, but there it is. I love you. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Eliza felt tears burning behind her eyes. You love me. Yeah, I do. Even though I'm stubborn and argumentative and have no idea what I'm doing? Because you're stubborn and argumentative and willing to figure it out anyway. He wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. You gonna say something or just stare at me? I'm trying to decide if you're real or if I hit my head harder than I thought when the coach crashed. I'm real. This is real. Then I love you too. The words tumbled out, and once they started, she couldn't stop them. I love you even though you're emotionally closed off and terrible at accepting help and live like a nomad. I love you because you came back when you said you would, and because you see me as I am, and because you make me want to be braver than I've ever been. He kissed her then, soft and careful and full of promise. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling like fools. So what now? She asked. Now you go back to your room before Mrs. Hendricks kicks me out for impropriety. Tomorrow you start preparing for your first day of teaching, and I take a few days to heal before figuring out my next job. That's very practical. One of us has to be. She laughed, kissed him once more, then forced herself to stand. At the door, she paused. Caleb? Yeah? Thank you for coming back. I'll always come back. That's a promise I can keep. She carried those words with her as she climbed the stairs to her own room, as she lay in bed trying to sleep, as dawn broke over Sweetwater and her new life truly began. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation and adjustment. School started on a Monday that came too fast and too slow at the same time. 12 students filed into the one-room schoolhouse, ranging from little Emma Watts, who was 6 and missing her front teeth, to Jacob Morrison, who was 13 and looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "My pa says women can't teach worth a damn," Jacob announced within the first 5 minutes. Eliza set down the chalk she'd been using to write the day's schedule. "Your pa say that, did he?" "Yes, ma'am. Says book learning's useless anyway." "I see. And what do you think?" The question seemed to surprise him. I don't know." "Then how about you stick around long enough to form your own opinion instead of just repeating what your father says?" The other students went quiet, waiting to see what Jacob would do. For a long moment he just stared at her, clearly not used to being challenged. Then, slowly, he sat down. "All right," he said, "but if it's boring, I'm leaving." "If it's boring, I'll have failed as a teacher. Deal?" "Deal." The rest of the day went smoother than she'd expected. The younger children were eager to learn, the older ones cautiously willing to give her a chance. By dismissal time, her voice was hoarse, and her leg ached from standing, but she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Useful. Like she was building something that mattered. Caleb was waiting outside when she locked up the schoolhouse. "How'd it go?" he asked, falling into step beside her. "Better than I feared, worse than I hoped. Pretty much exactly what teaching should be, I think." "Morrison's kid give you trouble?" "Some, but we came to an understanding." "You must be some kind of miracle worker then. That kid's got a reputation." "He's 13 and angry at the world. I know what that's like." She glanced at him. "How's your arm?" "Healing. Dr. Harrison says another week, and I'll be good as new." He shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "I got offered another job." Her stomach dropped. "Already?" "Short run, 3 days to Cheyenne and back, good pay." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "I could say no." "Why would you do that?" "Because you just started teaching. Because we just figured out this thing between us. Because nothing." She cut him off. "We agreed you'd keep working, that I'd build my life and you'd build yours, and we'd figure out how they fit together. I know what we said, but saying it and living it are different things." "Then we learned to live it." She took his good hand. "Take the job, Caleb. Come back when it's done. I'll still be here." "You're sure?" "No, but I'm willing to trust you. That's better than sure." He left 2 days later, and Eliza threw herself into teaching with an intensity that surprised her. She developed lesson plans that mixed traditional subjects with practical frontier skills, taught the older students basic bookkeeping and the younger ones their letters, started a lending library with the donated books, letting students take them home on the honor system. Jacob Morrison slowly transformed from hostile to grudgingly cooperative. He was smart, smarter than he wanted anyone to know. And once Eliza figured out he needed challenges rather than busy work, he started actually participating. "My pa still says book learning's useless," he told her one afternoon while helping clean slates. "What do you say?" "I say, maybe he's wrong about some things." It was the closest thing to praise she'd gotten from him. She'd take it. Caleb came back in 4 days instead of 3, bringing news that the Cheyenne run had gone so well the outfit wanted him for regular work. Once a week, sometimes twice, dependable pay. "It's good money," he told her that night over dinner at the boarding house. "Enough to start saving for something more permanent than a stable loft." "Like what?" "Like maybe a cabin, small place on some land outside town. Nothing fancy, but—" He trailed off, suddenly looking nervous. "But something that's mine, ours if you want." Her heart did something complicated. "You're thinking about settling down? I'm thinking about options, about what it would mean to have a home base instead of just camps and rented rooms." He met her eyes. "About what it would mean to build something with you that's more permanent than just seeing each other between jobs." "That sounds like you're talking about marriage." "Maybe I am. Eventually. When we've been together longer than 6 weeks and you're not still figuring out if I'm actually as good as I seem in crisis mode." She laughed despite the seriousness of the conversation. "You think you seem good in crisis mode?" "I think I seem functional, which is about the best I can hope for." "Well, you're wrong. You seem capable and steady and like someone I could build a life with." She reached across the table for his hand. "But you're right that we should wait. Make sure this is real when it's not just survival in proximity. So we keep doing what we're doing. I work, you teach, we see each other when we can, and we see if it's enough. And if it's not, then we figure out how to make it enough, or we admit it's not working and make different choices." She squeezed his hand. "But I don't think that's going to happen." "Why not?" "Because I wake up every morning thinking about you. Because I count the hours until you come back. Because when you're here, everything feels right in a way it never has before." She paused. "Because I'm in love with you, Caleb Rourke, and I don't think that's going to change just because we spend time apart." He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, careful of her still healing leg and his mostly healed arm, and kissed her like he was trying to memorize the moment. "I love you too," he said against her hair. "And you're right. This isn't going to change." Mrs. Hendricks cleared her throat from the doorway. "If you two are done being sentimental, there's cobbler for dessert." They broke apart, laughing, and followed her to the kitchen where the future waited, uncertain, complicated, and absolutely worth fighting for. The rhythm they'd found held through September and into October. Caleb took the Cheyenne runs twice a week, sometimes 3 times when freight was heavy. Eliza taught her students reading and arithmetic and how to think for themselves, which turned out to be the hardest lesson of all. They saw each other in the spaces between, dinners at the boarding house, walks along the creek at sunset. Stolen hours that felt both too much and not nearly enough. It should have been perfect. It almost was. The problem arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in the form of a telegram. Eliza was dismissing her students when Mrs. Hendricks appeared at the schoolhouse door, her face carefully neutral in a way that meant trouble. "This came for you," she said, holding out a yellow envelope. "From Bannock." Eliza's stomach turned over. She knew what it was before she opened it. Had been half expecting it for months, though she'd hoped it would never come. The telegram was brief, written in the clipped language of official business. "Confirm status of engagement. Wedding plans require resolution. Samuel Pritchard." She read it 3 times, each word settling like a stone in her chest. "Well?" Mrs. Hendricks asked gently. "It's from my fiancé, former fiancé. I don't know what he is anymore." Eliza folded the telegram with hands that wanted to shake. "He wants to know if I'm still planning to marry him." "Are you?" "No, of course not." "Then tell him that." "It's not that simple. I accepted his proposal, took money for the trip west. I owe him an explanation at minimum, probably more." "You don't owe him anything. You almost died. Your circumstances changed. People break engagements all the time, not without consequences." Eliza sat down on one of the student benches, suddenly exhausted. "If I formally break the engagement, he could demand repayment of expenses, could spread word that I'm unreliable, which would make finding any other position impossible. Could do a lot of things that don't matter one bit if you're living the life you actually want." Mrs. Hendricks sat beside her. "You love Caleb?" "Yes." "He love you?" "He says he does." "Then the choice is simple. Tell Pritchard the truth and deal with whatever comes after." Simple. Nothing about this was simple. Caleb returned that evening to find Eliza sitting on the boarding house porch, the telegram clutched in her hand. He took one look at her face and sat down beside her without a word. "Samuel wants an answer," she said, handing him the telegram. He read it quickly, his jaw tightening. "What are you going to tell him?" "The truth. That I can't marry him. That my circumstances have changed." She paused. "That I've fallen in love with someone else. You don't have to mention me." "Yes, I do. He deserves honesty, even if I can't give him anything else." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening street. "This is going to complicate things. I know. He might come here, might cause trouble. I know that too." "And you're still going to tell him?" "What's my alternative? Keep him waiting forever? Lie?" She turned to face Caleb fully. "I spent my whole life before this making choices based on what was safe or expected. Look where it got me. I'm done doing that." Something shifted in his expression. Pride, maybe, or recognition. "All right, then we handle whatever comes together." She wrote the letter that night, sitting at Mrs. Hendricks's kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside her. The words came hard, each one requiring more honesty than she was comfortable with. Dear Samuel, she began, then crossed it out. Too familiar. Mr. Pritchard felt too formal. She settled on just his name. Samuel, I'm writing to inform you that I cannot fulfill our engagement. The stagecoach I was traveling on was attacked by bandits. I sustained serious injuries and was left for dead. A frontier scout named Caleb Rourke found me and saved my life. During my recovery, circumstances changed. I changed. I am no longer the woman you agreed to marry, and it would be dishonest of me to proceed as if I were. I have secured a teaching position in Sweetwater and intend to build my life here. I understand this may cause you inconvenience or embarrassment, and for that I apologize. However, I cannot in good conscience marry you when my heart belongs to someone else. I will repay any expenses you incurred for my travel as soon as I am financially able. I wish you well in finding a partner more suited to your needs. Respectfully, Eliza Rowan. She read it over 3 times, changed heart belongs to affections lie, then changed it back. Either way, it was the truth. Either way, it would hurt him. But the alternative, marrying him anyway, living a lie, would hurt worse. She sealed the letter and posted it the next morning, then waited for the consequences. They came 3 weeks later. Eliza was in the middle of a geography lesson when the schoolhouse door opened and a man stepped inside. Tall, well-dressed in city clothes that looked absurd on the frontier, with a severe part in his hair that she recognized from a photograph she'd seen months ago. Samuel Pritchard had come to Sweetwater. Miss Rowan, he said, his voice carrying across the small room. We need to talk. 12 pairs of eyes swiveled between them. Eliza felt her face heat, but kept her voice steady. I'm in the middle of teaching. If you'd like to wait outside, I've traveled 3 days to get here. I'm not waiting outside. Jacob Morrison stood up from his desk. The teacher said, wait outside. This is a private matter, and this is her classroom. Jacob crossed his arms. So either you wait outside like she said, or you leave. Your choice. For a moment, Eliza thought Samuel was going to argue. Then something in the room's atmosphere, 12 students staring him down with frontier-hardened defiance, made him reconsider. Fine. I'll wait outside, but this conversation is happening, Miss Rowan. He left, closing the door with more force than necessary. Eliza took a breath, willing her hands not to shake. Thank you, Jacob. He's the one, isn't he? The man you were supposed to marry. Yes. You dodged a bullet. He seems like an idiot. Jacob? What? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. A few of the younger students giggled. Eliza couldn't help smiling despite the anxiety knotting her stomach. Let's get back to geography, she said. The remaining hour was torture. She stumbled through lessons she could normally teach in her sleep, her mind on the man waiting outside and the conversation she didn't want to have. When dismissal finally came, the students filed out with worried backward glances. Jacob was the last to leave. You want me to stick around? In case it gets difficult? That's kind of you, but I'll be all right, if you're sure. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, Miss Rowan, I think you made the right choice. You're happy here. Anyone can see that. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the inevitable. She found Samuel pacing in front of the schoolhouse, his city shoes already covered in prairie dust. Up close, he looked older than his photograph, mid-30s, with lines around his eyes that spoke of stress or disappointment. Mr. Pritchard, she said, this is unexpected. I had to see for myself. He stopped pacing, studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Had to see if you were really choosing to throw away everything we planned over some frontier romance. I'm choosing to build a life that's mine. That's different. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're choosing poverty and uncertainty over security and partnership. We wouldn't have been partners. You wanted a housekeeper who could read and write. I wanted an escape from debt. That's not a foundation for marriage. His face flushed. That's not fair. I offered you respect, stability. You offered me a transaction, and I don't blame you for that. It's what we both thought we wanted. But then I almost died, Samuel. I was left broken and alone in the middle of nowhere, and I had to decide who I wanted to be when I survived. The woman who makes safe choices, or the woman who makes honest ones. And this Caleb Rourke, he's an honest choice? He's the most honest thing I've ever known. He's a drifter with no property and no prospects. What kind of future does that offer you? An uncertain one, a difficult one. But it's mine. She met his eyes directly. I'm sorry I can't be who you needed, truly. But I can't marry you. I won't. He was quiet for a long moment, anger and hurt warring on his face. I could sue you for breach of contract, demand repayment of travel expenses. You could, and I deserve it. She pulled a small envelope from her pocket, money she'd been saving from her teaching salary, nearly everything she had. This is partial repayment. I'll send more as I'm able. It might take years, but I will pay you back. He looked at the envelope, but didn't take it. I don't want your money, Eliza. I wanted a partner, someone intelligent and capable, someone who could build a life with me in this territory. I know, and you deserve that. But that person isn't me. Because of him. Because of me. Caleb just helped me see it. Samuel finally took the envelope, weighing it in his hand. You're making a mistake. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. He nodded slowly, accepting what he couldn't change. I hope you're right about him. I hope this uncertain, difficult life makes you happy. So do I. He left without saying goodbye, riding out of Sweetwater the same way he'd arrived, alone, with plans that hadn't survived contact with reality. Eliza watched him go and felt nothing but relief. The story of the confrontation spread through town within hours, twisted and embellished with each retelling. By the time Caleb returned from his Cheyenne run that evening, half of Sweetwater thought Eliza had fought off an abusive ex-fiancé, and the other half thought she'd rejected a wealthy suitor for true love. Both versions are ridiculous, Eliza told him over dinner. The truth is much more boring. The truth is you told him no and meant it. Caleb reached for her hand across the table. That's not boring. That's brave. It was terrifying. Most brave things are. Mrs. Hendricks appeared with coffee, setting cups down with knowing looks. So, that's that then. You're officially free of obligation. Officially in debt, you mean. It'll take me 3 years to pay him back at this rate. Small price for your freedom. The boarding house owner settled into a chair, clearly ready for a conversation. Now we can talk about the real issue. Caleb and Eliza exchanged glances. What real issue? Eliza asked. The fact that you two are clearly committed to each other, but living in separate rooms like this is still temporary. Mrs. Hendricks fixed them both with a stern look. What are your intentions? Mrs. Hendricks, Caleb started. Don't Mrs. Hendricks me. I run a respectable establishment, and I like you both too much to watch you dance around the obvious forever. So I'm asking directly, are you planning to get married, or are we pretending this is just a casual friendship that happens to involve meaningful eye contact? Eliza felt her face burning. We've only been together a few months. I married my first husband after knowing him 3 weeks. We had 40 good years before he passed. Time isn't the measure, commitment is. She stood up, brushing crumbs from her apron. You don't have to decide tonight, but decide soon, because uncertainty is romantic in novels and exhausting in real life. She left them sitting there, the question hanging heavy in the air. She's not subtle, Caleb said finally. No, she's not. Eliza stared at her coffee. But she's not wrong either. You think we should get married? I think, she chose her words carefully, I think I want to build a life with you. I think I want something more permanent than separate rooms and stolen moments. But I also think we should be sure. How do we get sure? I don't know. Live through a winter together? See if we still like each other when we're trapped inside for months? Test whether this holds up under normal circumstances instead of just crisis and recovery? He was quiet for a moment, then, what if I bought land? She looked up sharply. What? There's a quarter section about 3 miles out, 160 acres with water rights, and a small cabin. Owner's moving back east, wants to sell cheap. He wouldn't meet her eyes. I've been saving from the Cheyenne runs. I almost have enough for a down payment. Her heart was doing complicated things. You want a homestead? I want to stop drifting. Want to have something that's mine, ours if you want it. A place to come back to that's more than just a rented room. He finally looked at her. But I won't do it unless you're in. Unless this is real enough for both of us to bet our futures on. This was it. The moment that mattered. Not the dramatic rescue or the healing or even the declaration of love. This moment, sitting in a boarding house kitchen over cooling coffee, deciding whether to turn possibility into permanence. Show me the land, she said. They rode out the next Sunday, Eliza's legs strong enough now for the journey. The property was exactly as Caleb had described, rough, but promising, with a creek running along the southern edge and enough flat land for crops or livestock. The cabin was small, barely more than one room, but solidly built. It needs work, Caleb said, dismounting to check the roof. New shingles, better door, windows that actually close. But the bones are good. Eliza walked the perimeter, imagining it. A garden here. Maybe chickens. Room to expand the cabin if they needed more space. Close enough to town for her to keep teaching, far enough for the privacy they'd need. We could be happy here, she said. Yeah, I think we could. She turned to find him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. Caleb, marry me. The words came out rough, unpolished. Not because it's expected or practical or makes sense on paper. Marry me because I love you, and I want to build this life with you. Because I'm tired of pretending temporary is enough when I want permanent. That's not a very romantic proposal. I'm not a romantic person, but I mean every word. She crossed the distance between them, taking his hands. Yes. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, we'll buy this land. Yes, we'll build something permanent and difficult and absolutely ours. She kissed him, soft and sure. Yes to all of it. He pulled her close, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. You're sure? No doubts? A million doubts, but more certainty. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. They were married 3 weeks later by a circuit judge who happened through Sweetwater. No big ceremony, no white dress or flowers. Just vows spoken in the boarding house parlor with Dr. Harrison and Mrs. Hendricks as witnesses, Jacob Morrison and a few students watching from the doorway. Do you, Caleb Rourke, take this woman? I do. I haven't finished the question yet. Don't need to. Answer's the same regardless. I do. The judge sighed but smiled. And do you, Eliza Rowan, take this man? I do. Well then. By the power vested in me by the territory, I now pronounce you married. You can kiss her if you want. He did. And in that moment, surrounded by the people who'd become family, Eliza felt something she'd been searching for her entire life without knowing it. Home. The first winter was hard. The cabin proved less weathertight than they'd hoped, and Caleb spent December essentially rebuilding the roof while snow fell. Eliza continued teaching through January, riding into town twice a week and working on lessons at the cabin the rest of the time. Money was tight. They'd sunk everything into the land and had nothing left for luxuries. But they were happy. Not the easy, uncomplicated happiness of romance novels. The real kind, built from shared work and compromise and learning to navigate each other's rough edges. They fought sometimes, about money, about whose turn it was to feed the chickens, about whether they could afford to buy more books for the school. But they also learned to apologize, to listen, to choose each other even when it was hard. Spring came slowly, then all at once. The creek thawed. Grass pushed up through old snow. Caleb started breaking ground for a garden while Eliza finished the school term, her students showing progress that made her irrationally proud. Jacob Morrison stopped by the cabin one afternoon, ostensibly to borrow tools but really just to visit. My pa's leaving, he announced while helping Caleb mend fence. Taking a job in Colorado. Says there's better money there. You going with him? Caleb asked. He wants me to, but I was thinking... The boy scuffed his boot in the dirt. Maybe I could stay, help you and Miss Rowan, Mrs. Rourke, with the homestead, earn my keep and finish school. Eliza and Caleb exchanged glances. That's a big decision, Eliza said carefully. Your father might not approve. My father approves of whatever keeps me out of his hair. Jacob looked at them directly. I want to learn from people who actually give a damn. People like you two. So Jacob Morrison became their first hand, sleeping in the loft they'd built and working harder than any 13-year-old should have to. He learned farming from Caleb and continued his studies with Eliza, transforming from the angry, defensive boy she'd met into something approaching a decent human. Summer brought more changes. Dr. Harrison retired, selling her practice to a young doctor from St. Louis, but staying in Sweetwater to interfere with everyone's business, as she put it. Mrs. Hendricks opened a second boarding house. 2 more families moved to town, bringing 4 new students to Eliza's classroom. And in late August, Eliza realized she was pregnant. She told Caleb on a Sunday evening, standing in the garden they'd planted together, watching the sun set over land that was finally, truly theirs. "I'm going to have a baby," she said quietly. He went very still. "You're sure?" "Dr. Harrison confirmed it yesterday. I'm about 3 months along." For a long moment, he didn't say anything, just stared at her like he was trying to process information in a foreign language. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. Genuine, unguarded, full of joy she'd never seen from him before. "We're having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We're having a baby." He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing, and when he set her down, he was crying. Happy tears, the first she'd ever seen from him. "I never thought," he started, then stopped. "I never let myself want this. Want family, permanence, a future that looked like normal people's futures. Thought that wasn't for people like me." "What changed?" "You. You changed everything." He pressed his forehead to hers. "You took a broken man living in a tent and gave him reasons to build something that lasts. We built it together. Yeah, we did. The baby came in February, during a snowstorm that trapped them in the cabin for 3 days. Dr. Harrison made it through the drifts just in time, bringing her medical bag and a bottle of whiskey for medicinal purposes. Labor was long and difficult, and nothing like the gentle, dignified process Eliza had imagined. She screamed curses that made even Caleb blush. Broke his hand gripping it during contractions, threatened to murder him for getting her into this situation. But when the baby finally arrived, a girl with dark hair and her father's eyes, everything else disappeared. "She's perfect," Eliza whispered, exhausted and exhilarated and overwhelmed. "She looks like you," Caleb said, touching one tiny hand with reverence. "She looks like herself." They named her Sarah, after Eliza's mother. Sarah Rourke, born in a frontier cabin during a snowstorm, welcomed into a life that promised exactly nothing except love and hard work and parents who would fight like hell to give her choices. Jacob, who'd been hiding in the barn during the birth, came in to meet his new almost sister with eyes suspiciously wet. "She's awful small," he said. "She'll grow," Caleb assured him. Can I hold her?" Eliza handed Sarah over carefully, watching as the boy who'd been so angry at the world cradled new life with surprising gentleness. "Hey, Sarah," Jacob whispered, "I'm going to teach you to ride and shoot and probably get in trouble, but I'll also make sure nobody messes with you. That's a promise." 3 years later, standing in the doorway of a cabin they'd expanded twice, watching Jacob teach 5-year-old Sarah how to feed the chickens while Caleb worked on adding another room for the second baby that was coming in the fall, Eliza Rourke thought about the woman she'd been. The woman who'd boarded a stagecoach in Philadelphia, running toward safety that was really just another kind of cage. Who'd been broken and abandoned and left to die in the grass. Who'd met a stranger and made a choice that changed everything. She'd been terrified back then, desperate, willing to trade herself for security because she thought that was all she deserved. But somewhere between that stagecoach crash and this moment, she'd learned something the woman she'd been couldn't have understood. The things that break you can also remake you into something stronger. The moments that destroy your carefully laid plans can be the ones that give you a real life. Safety was an illusion. Guarantees didn't exist. The frontier didn't care about your dreams or your fears or your desperate need for certainty, but neither did it care about your past or your mistakes or who you used to be. Out here, you could become anyone, build anything. Choose a life that terrified and fulfilled you in equal measure. Caleb came up behind her, sliding his arms around her waist, resting his hand on the growing swell of their second child. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how lucky I am that those bandits left me behind." He tensed. "That's a dark thought, is it? If they hadn't, I'd be dead or married to Samuel Pritchard. Either way, I wouldn't have this. Wouldn't have you or Sarah or this life we built from absolutely nothing. When you put it that way, the worst thing that ever happened to me turned out to be the best thing." She turned in his arms, "because it broke me open enough to let real life in." He kissed her, soft and familiar. "No regrets?" "A million regrets, but none about choosing you." Sarah's laughter drifted across the yard, high and clear. Jacob was chasing her with a chicken, both of them shrieking. The garden needed weeding. The roof still leaked in heavy rain. They had about $20 in savings and a mortgage that would take 15 years to pay off. It was messy and uncertain and absolutely nothing like the safe life Eliza had once imagined for herself. It was perfect, because sometimes the life you're meant to live doesn't look like the one you planned. Sometimes it looks like survival and heartbreak and impossible choices. Sometimes it looks like a stranger who stops when everyone else rides on. Sometimes it looks like breaking every rule you've ever lived by and trusting that what you build will be strong enough to hold. And sometimes, just sometimes, the moment that nearly destroys you turns out to be the moment that gives you everything. Eliza had learned that lesson in the grass beside an overturned stagecoach. With a shattered leg and a shattered life and nothing left but the terrifying freedom to choose who she wanted to become. She'd chosen honestly, chosen difficulty, chosen a man who offered nothing but his presence and a shared commitment to figuring it out together. And in doing so, she'd found something she hadn't even known to look for, a life that was entirely, authentically, impossibly hers. The sun set over their land, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. Caleb kept his arms around her. Sarah's laughter continued. Jacob called out that the chickens were revolting, and Eliza Rourke, who'd come west seeking safety and found something far more valuable instead, smiled and held tight to the life she'd built from broken pieces. Because that's what you do. You take what breaks you, and you build something new. You take the moments that strip everything away, and you use them to figure out what actually matters. You take the strangers who stop when they should keep riding, and you let them teach you that love isn't about guarantees. It's about showing up again and again, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The frontier didn't care about your story, didn't care if you survived or failed or built something that lasted. But the people you chose to build with, they cared. They showed up. They held your hand while your leg was set and stood beside you while you learned to walk again. They offered uncertain futures and honest partnerships and the terrifying gift of being seen exactly as you were. And that, Eliza had learned, was worth more than all the safety in the world.